Emily had always imagined her late 30s would be full of warmth, laughter, and family dinners. Instead, her days felt like long stretches of quiet that pressed down on her shoulders. 2 years had passed since her husband Mark died suddenly, and yet the silence in their Seattle home still clung to every wall. She had tried filling the emptiness with small routines, watering plants, cooking simple meals, checking emails at night, but nothing erased the hollow sound of an empty chair at the table. When Mark's son, Daniel, moved in shortly after the funeral, Emily thought his presence would bring life back into the house. At 23, Daniel had been studying architecture and working part-time at a design firm. He was polite, respectful, and always tried to help where he could. But grief had settled into him too. Their conversations were short, often about groceries or bills, sometimes about the weather. He kept his headphones in when he studied and disappeared into his room when he wasn't at work. Emily understood he had lost his father, and no amount of casual talk could fill that kind of absence. Still, she noticed the way the quiet between them had changed. At first, it was the silence of two people grieving under the same roof. Later, it became a silence full of things left unsaid. She didn't know when it happened, but Emily began noticing details she hadn't before. The way Daniel's laughter, rare as it was, softened the heavy air. The way he fixed the old coffee machine without being asked, his sleeves rolled up and his concentration deep. She would scold herself when her thoughts wandered too far, reminding herself sternly, "He's just my stepson." But reminders didn't stop feelings. And feelings, once stirred, had a way of slipping through cracks no matter how hard you tried to close them. One evening, Emily was folding laundry in the living room when Daniel walked in after work. He had taken off his jacket, his tie loosened, his hair still damp from the rain outside. He looked tired, but there was a steadiness in him that caught her off guard. For a moment, she stared too long, and when their eyes met, she quickly bent back to the clothes. "Long day?" she asked. "Yeah," he said, dropping his bag on the couch. "Deadlines, meetings, the usual." His voice was casual, but when he sat down across from her, Emily felt something shift. She could hear the rain against the windows, smell the faint scent of coffee still lingering from earlier. It was an ordinary evening, but somehow it felt anything but ordinary. Later that night, Emily stood by the kitchen sink, rinsing a glass. Daniel had gone to his room, yet she couldn't stop replaying the way his eyes had lingered on her. It wasn't bold or careless, but there was weight in it. She shook her head, telling herself she was imagining things, twisting simple moments into something they weren't. But even as she told herself this, her chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with imagination. The next morning, Emily woke early. She made pancakes the way Mark used to like them, though she wasn't sure why Daniel preferred eggs and toast. Still, when he came into the kitchen and saw the plate waiting, his expression softened. "Thanks," he said, sitting down. For the first time in months, they ate together without rushing, without filling the silence with empty words. It was small, just pancakes on a rainy morning, but Emily felt something fragile taking root. It frightened her. She didn't want to betray Mark's memory. She didn't want to confuse grief with affection. But the truth was simple. Daniel was no longer just the quiet young man she had once thought of as Mark's son. He was becoming someone she noticed, someone she cared about, someone who made the house feel alive again. That realization left her both unsettled and restless. She knew feelings like this were complicated. They came with questions and boundaries that couldn't be ignored. But she also knew something had begun to shift inside her, something she couldn't undo. For weeks, Emily kept herself busy, determined not to dwell on what she felt. She volunteered at the library, joined a cooking class, even started jogging in the mornings. But every evening when she came home, Daniel was there, and the quiet glances, the gentle exchanges, the unspoken comfort of sharing the same roof. Those things reminded her that no matter how far she tried to run, her heart was already tangled in something new. And so the house that once echoed with grief began to hold a different kind of silence. Not empty, not heavy, something charged, something waiting. Emily didn't know where it would lead, and she wasn't sure she wanted to. All she knew was that the silence no longer belonged to the past. It belonged to something else, something growing, fragile, and impossible to ignore. The rain came hard that night, pouring against the windows as if the whole city was drowning in it. Emily was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup, when she heard the front door slam shut. Daniel stepped in, his jacket dripping water onto the floor, his dark hair plastered against his forehead. He shook himself like someone trying to escape the storm, his shoulders rising and falling with quick breaths. "You're soaked," Emily said, rushing for a towel. She handed it to him, her voice filled with the quiet concern she often carried. Daniel smiled faintly, brushing the towel over his hair. "I'll be fine. You always worry too much." The way he said it made her pause. It wasn't dismissive or cold, it was warm, almost teasing, as though he didn't mind her worry at all. Their eyes met, and for a moment Emily forgot to breathe. She looked away quickly, returning to the soup, but her hands trembled as she stirred. He moved closer, setting his jacket over a chair, and the kitchen suddenly felt smaller, filled with more than the sound of rain. "Smells good," he said, leaning against the counter. "It's just soup," Emily replied, trying to sound casual. But her voice was softer than she intended, and she knew he noticed. They sat down at the table, steam rising from their bowls. The silence between them wasn't heavy like before. It had changed. Each glance across the table lingered a little longer. Each smile carried a quiet weight. Emily could feel it in her chest, a pull she tried to ignore. She kept telling herself it was nothing, that she was just grateful for his company. But deep down, she knew better. Halfway through the meal, the lights flickered, the storm outside threatening the power lines. For a brief moment the room went dark, then brightened again. Emily laughed nervously. Seattle weather never changes. Daniel's lips curved into a small smile. "Yeah, but I don't mind it. Makes the house feel safe somehow." The word hung in the air, safe. Emily looked at him, really looked, and saw something she hadn't allowed herself to see before. He wasn't just the young man she had known through Mark, quiet and distant. He was older now, steadier, carrying himself with a maturity that startled her. He was becoming someone she could lean on, someone who made her feel less alone. Her heart raced, and she quickly dropped her gaze to the soup. She couldn't let herself think that way. She couldn't let a fleeting spark turn into something dangerous. After dinner, Daniel offered to clean up, but Emily shook her head. "Go dry off. I'll handle it." "Thanks," he said softly, and when he brushed past her on the way out of the kitchen, his sleeve grazed her arm. It was nothing, an accident, but the warmth of it stayed long after he had gone upstairs. Emily stood frozen, her pulse quickening, the spoon still in her hand. Later, when she lay in bed, the storm still roaring outside, she couldn't sleep. Every sound of rain reminded her of the look in his eyes, the tone in his voice, the way the air between them had felt alive. She pressed her pillow tighter, whispering to herself, "He's your stepson. Don't be foolish." But the heart doesn't always listen to reason. The days that followed only made it harder. She found herself noticing more the way Daniel leaned over his drafting table, sketching lines with a focused intensity, the way his laughter came easier now, when they watched a movie together, the way he carried in groceries without being asked. Small things, ordinary things, but they began to mean more than she wanted them to. One afternoon, Emily was folding laundry when Daniel walked in from work, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his hair slightly mussed. He looked tired, but when he saw her, his expression softened. "You didn't have to do my laundry," he said, his voice warm with gratitude. "I don't mind," she replied quickly, her cheeks heating. She wanted to tell him it was just habit, something she did without thinking, but the words stuck. Instead, she folded the shirt in her hands and placed it carefully on the stack, pretending not to notice the way he was watching her. That evening, as they sat in the living room, the air felt charged again. Daniel stretched out on the couch, his arm resting along the back. Emily sat in the chair nearby, pretending to focus on her book, but she was acutely aware of him. She could feel his gaze drifting toward her now and then, steady and searching. Every time she looked up, he quickly turned back to the television, but the unspoken tension only grew. She told herself she was imagining it, that he wasn't thinking anything like what she feared. But deep inside, she knew he felt it too. There was no mistaking the kind of silence they now shared. The spark had been lit that stormy night, and no matter how hard she tried, Emily couldn't put it out. It followed her in the mornings when she made coffee, in the evenings when they passed each other in the hallway, in the quiet moments when their hands almost touched and both of them hesitated. She didn't know where this path would lead, and the thought frightened her. But she also couldn't deny it anymore. Something had shifted between them. Something that was no longer just grief or loneliness or the comfort of living under the same roof. It was something else. Something deeper. Something she could no longer ignore. The weeks that followed tested Emily in ways she had not expected. She tried to live as if nothing had changed, filling her days with errands and small distractions. She went to the market, chatted with neighbors, even started attending a cooking class downtown. On the surface, life moved forward as it always had. But inside, she was unsettled. Every evening, when Daniel returned home, the mask of normalcy slipped. His presence filled the house, and she found herself waiting for the sound of the door. The steady rhythm of his footsteps, the warmth that spread through the room when he entered. She told herself it was nothing, just gratitude for his company in her otherwise quiet life. But that wasn't true anymore. The way his eyes met hers, the way his voice softened when he spoke to her, the way silence between them had shifted, these were not things she could explain away. One night, the storm returned. Rain hammered against the windows, and the wind shook the trees outside. The power flickered once, twice, then went out completely, plunging the house into darkness. Emily lit a few candles and set them on the table, their glow casting shadows across the walls. The storm outside raged, but inside the room felt strangely calm. Daniel came down the stairs, holding his phone as a flashlight. When he saw the candles, he smiled. "Looks cozy," he said, setting the phone aside. Emily nodded, trying to steady her hands as she adjusted the candles. "It feels like we're cut off from the rest of the world," she murmured. They sat across from each other at the table. The flickering light softened his features, made his eyes look deeper, warmer. Emily's heart thudded in her chest. She told herself to focus on the storm, on anything but him. But then he spoke, his voice low, almost hesitant. "It's strange," Daniel said. "This house used to feel so cold after Dad passed. But lately, it feels alive again." Emily's breath caught. She wanted to ask what he meant, but she already knew. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the table. The words she needed wouldn't come, so she stayed quiet. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, heavy with meaning. When Daniel's hand brushed hers on the table, she froze. It was a small touch, So slight it could have been an accident, but she knew it wasn't. He didn't pull away, and neither did she. Their hands lingered, barely touching, but the spark between them was undeniable. Emily's mind screamed at her to move, to stop this before it went further. But her heart betrayed her. She stayed, letting the warmth of his hand seep into hers, letting herself feel what she had been denying. When she finally looked up, Daniel's eyes were already on her. They held a question, unspoken but clear. He wasn't forcing anything. He was waiting, giving her the choice. And in that moment, Emily realized the truth she had been running from. She wanted this. She wanted him. The storm outside grew louder, thunder rolling across the sky. But Emily barely heard it. All she could hear was her own heartbeat, fast and uneven. All she could feel was the fragile space between them, ready to break. She pulled her hand back, breaking the contact. Daniel's expression faltered, a flicker of disappointment crossing his face. But he didn't say anything. Emily stood quickly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I should check the windows," she said, her voice too rushed, too thin. He nodded, though his eyes lingered on her as she moved through the room. The moment had been broken, but it was not gone. It hovered in the air, waiting. Undeniable. Later that night, when the storm had calmed and the power returned, Emily lay awake in bed. She replayed everything, the flicker of the candles, the brush of his hand, the look in his eyes. She buried her face in the pillow, whispering, "What are you doing, Emily?" But she had no answer. The next morning, she tried to act normal. She made coffee, scrambled eggs, set the table as she always did. When Daniel came into the kitchen, he greeted her with his usual calm, but there was something in his gaze that told her he hadn't forgotten the night before. Neither of them spoke about it, but the silence was louder than words. Days passed and the tension only grew. Every shared glance lingered longer. Every small touch carried more weight. When they watched a movie together, their shoulders nearly touched, and both of them sat too still, too aware. When Emily reached across the table for the salt, her hand brushed his again, and this time she didn't move away so quickly. She knew they were crossing a line, even if they hadn't said it aloud. It wasn't physical yet, but it was emotional, and that was dangerous enough. She told herself it had to stop. But when she looked at him, when she saw the kindness in his eyes, the steady way he cared for her without even realizing it, she couldn't bring herself to push him away. One evening, Emily stood in the hallway, her hand resting on the doorframe to Daniel's room. The door was slightly open, the glow of his desk lamp spilling into the hall. He was bent over his drawings, his pencil moving steadily across the page. She watched him for a moment, unnoticed, and felt her chest tighten. He wasn't just her late husband's son anymore. He was a man, full of his own life and dreams, someone who had quietly become the center of her days. She stepped back before he could see her, retreating to her room. She pressed her back against the door, her eyes closed, whispering, "This can't happen." But even as she said it, she knew it already had. The line had been crossed not with a kiss, not with words, but with feelings too strong to deny. And once crossed, there was no way to go back. Emily didn't sleep at all after that stormy night. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts tangled and restless. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Daniel's face lit by candlelight, his eyes steady, his hand brushing hers across the table. It had been such a small moment, but it had changed everything inside her. She could no longer pretend the feelings didn't exist. She could no longer tell herself it was just loneliness. Something deeper had taken hold, and the more she tried to push it away, the stronger it became. When morning came, the house was quiet, except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint drip of rain outside. Emily tried to distract herself by cleaning the kitchen, but her hands shook and her mind refused to settle. She poured herself a cup of coffee, but before she could take a sip, there was a knock at the door. Her heart stopped. It was Daniel's voice, low and careful. "Emily, can we talk?" She froze for a moment, then slowly opened the door. He stood there, his expression uncertain, his shoulders tense, as if the weight of his words was almost too much to carry. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then he took a deep breath. "I don't want to ruin this," he said softly. "But I can't keep pretending nothing has changed. You mean more to me than I should probably admit." The words hit her like a wave. She had expected silence, avoidance, maybe even distance, but not this. Her eyes filled with tears and she turned away, pressing her hand against her mouth. "Daniel, you don't know what you're saying," she whispered. "I do," he replied, his voice steady now. He stepped inside, careful, as though he didn't want to frighten her. "I know it's complicated. I know people wouldn't understand, but I can't hide how I feel anymore." Emily shook her head, torn between fear and relief. For months she had been carrying this weight alone, convincing herself she was imagining things. Now, hearing him say it out loud, she realized she hadn't been alone in this at all. He had felt it too. Her hands trembled as she set down the coffee cup. She turned to face him, her voice breaking. "This isn't simple, Daniel. You're my stepson. People will think—" "I don't care what they think," he interrupted gently. "All I care about is you. You've been the one holding this home together. You've been the one who made me feel like I still had a family after Dad died. And somewhere along the way, it became more than that. I can't go back to pretending you're just— Emily, you're everything." Tears slid down her cheeks before she could stop them. His words filled the room, leaving no space for denial. She had tried so hard to build walls, but now they were gone, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. She wanted to run, but at the same time, she wanted to stay in that moment forever. Slowly, she reached for his hand. Her fingers touched his, hesitant at first, then firmer when he didn't pull away. The warmth of his skin sent a rush of feeling through her. She looked into his eyes and saw no hesitation, only honesty and longing. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know what happens next." "We don't need to know," he replied. "All we need to know is what we feel." For the first time in years, Emily felt alive. The grief that had weighed her down, the silence that had haunted the house, it all lifted in that moment. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew she couldn't keep living in fear of what others might say. Life was too short to deny something real. They stood there for a long time, holding hands in the soft morning light. No promises were made, no declarations about the future. It was enough to know they weren't alone in what they felt. Later that day, Emily sat by the window, watching the clouds drift apart, the storm finally passing. Daniel was in the next room, quietly sketching at his desk. The house, once filled with silence and shadows, now felt different. Not perfect, not certain, but alive. Emily knew the road ahead would not be easy. There would be questions, doubts, maybe even judgment from others. But none of that mattered as much as the truth they now shared. She had lost so much when Mark died, but life had given her something unexpected, something she never thought she would feel again, hope. The night of the storm had changed everything. It had stripped away fear, broken down walls, and left only what was real between them. And though Emily didn't know what tomorrow would look like, she knew one thing for sure. There was no turning back. For the first time in a long time, she was ready to step into whatever future awaited her hand in hand with Daniel.